Hey guys, welcome back to the Venus Report podcast. I'm Kate.
I'm Liz. We're back. We're here in Pennsylvania. We have our two cousins right here, Nathan and Nick. And they know nothing about astrology, so they're going to ask us questions and we're going to answer them.
Yeah. So before we get started, they came up with questions beforehand and we're just going to answer them off the cuff. And then we might tangent off, but we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. We do have somebody in the crowd here, one of Nathan's friends. We might open up the floor a little bit, more questions, but yeah, we're gonna get started.
Yeah. So ask away.
Yes.
Whoever wants to go first.
Okay. So something I've always wanted to understand about astrology. First of all, thanks for having us.
Mm-hmm.
Second off, is what can the average person? What can they take from these practices to better their life, or what are the implementations of it that the average person, who knows nothing about it, could take some things to learn from?
Yeah. I would say the number one thing that astrology does is it's more of a guidance for your life. It kind of just shows you this is what you're born with. These are the tendencies you tend to have in these areas of life, and that all comes once you understand the house systems. But it kind of, I would say it's like a guiding light in a way. It helps you to make decisions based on how you already know that you are, and then it allows you to kind of shape shift in ways, whether that's like adding more energy into an area of life that doesn't have any planets or something. Like say you have no planets in Virgo, but you want to tap into what that is, or say that time of year is always spoken to you, like Virgo season, like end of August. You could like kind of add energy into that area of life and see how you react to it, and kind of let that also be a guiding light for you and how it defines you as a person.
Yeah, and I think the practices of astrology can really be beneficial for mental health in particular, because if you look at your chart and you get a little bit more familiar with your birth chart, you can see, like Liz was saying, your tendencies, like where you tend to go mentally. If you tend to be like really fiery and you tend to like be all over the place, maybe you're like ADHD or something, that can literally manifest as like a placement in your birth chart. So if you're like, I feel really unfocused and I want to be better at being focused, astrology can help you accept the fact that you're unfocused without shame, blame, and all that shit that comes with it. And when you see, okay, this is like, maybe I have a tendency to be really fiery because I have this placement and it's not my fault, right? And then you can focus on those other areas of life that allow you to be maybe a little bit more watery and a little bit more flowy. And I think mental health can be like a big reflection in your birth chart, so you can see like, what are my skill sets? What are my blind spots in life? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
I think you said that.
Cool. Next question.
Yeah, going off of that, so for like us, we're very new to this. So what's the step one? Like, where do you start?
Step one.
Your signs.
Yeah, I would say like
Is that?
step one, learning astrology, is you can learn all the signs, the 12 signs of the zodiac.
And not just your own.
And not just your own. So throw away the birth chart and just learn your signature, or just learn the 12 signs. And they act as like archetypes. So if you've ever studied like Carl Jung's psychology and archetypes, you can learn all of those 12 different energies that exist in the universe. So every person has these like 12 different archetypes or energies that they embody in some way. And you can learn that as wisdom. And you take that and you're like, okay, what is my signature? Like, what is my special energy that I embody the most of in my life? So I would start there. And you can also download like an app that gives you like a little horoscope, but that's even going a little far, because I feel like sometimes horoscopes don't even resonate with people because they don't know enough about astrology in the first place.
Yeah. And like your sun sign is also a good place to start too, because it allows you to understand the sun really is our identity and like our vital energy. It really is one of the biggest things that show up in a person is the sun sign. But yes, there are so many other facets to how you might react in certain situations, right? Like you might not act so balanced as a Libra in all situations, and you're like, okay, that's bullshit, I'm not a Libra. Like, you know what I mean? But it also just goes to show you, your sun sign really just goes to show you how you approach, like, how you identify, how you just, like, show up in a room and shine. Like, think of the elements of the sun. The sun just shines light on everything. The sun is how you shine light on everything. It's not particularly how you deal with conflict. It's not particularly how you deal in communication, business. It's not, so it just really is like the shining light. And when you get to know all the planets, you can understand all the planets and how they represent certain things in life.
I would also say to start with astrology, like, start with self-knowledge practices. Start, like, meditating. And you guys both are involved in that already. Start meditating and get to know yourself. And when you get to know yourself, that is like step 0.
That is step 0. That's
it's like a prerequisite. Prereq of astrology is like, get to know yourself, and then you can see your own tendencies despite what astrology has to say, and then approach astrology as like, let's see what this has to offer me. And then you can make inferences and connect
you
the
can
dots.
make connections like, that's why Mercury comes in through this way, that's how I communicate, and it will just go to show more. So
and
it's like,
and I feel like people get too involved in astrology when they don't know enough about themselves at all.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, astrology says I'm this way.
So then they grab onto it.
And then they grab onto it as an identity, and it really doesn't resonate with them. So as an astrology podcast, like, I feel like I want to encourage people, like, not to even get involved in astrology and get involved in self-knowledge first.
Yeah.
Like, that's my advice.
That's my advice, too.
It's like, get to know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And astrology can help you on the way of that.
Yep.
Because it really goes down, it gets so deep. It gets into, like, your karma, your dharma, like, your karma, your past lives.
Yeah.
So that's, like, a big thing to take on, knowledge-wise, when you're not even sure who you are in the world.
How you are, too. Like,
yes, it just seems like other information.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people don't really get involved in astrology, because it seems so unapproachable.
Yeah.
Because you're like, you're just defining who I am, and like, that
by
feels
an archetype
so weird.
that's like 1 out of 12.
Does that make sense?
It's hard to be open. Like, you have to be open-minded. If you're not even to that point, you're not even
exactly
start.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So along that line, like, how, like, you saw my charts earlier, I think, which I hadn't seen before. But when you look at someone's charts for the first time, like, what are some of the things you're looking at, like, that you might be able to, like, help explain, like, kind of where they're at with their sign?
Yeah.
Or, like, what are the basics
somebody
you're
who's
taking
new?
from that? Someone brand new,
Yeah.
just got their sign, they see all these things, they don't know what they mean. Like, what are you looking for, like, when you see that, the chart for the first time?
I would say the number one thing I look at is actually aspects. So that is like when you're looking at a chart, and if everyone is looking at their chart, they might see like these blue lines and these red lines and these green lines. But what aspects really represent is things that might seem like an infusion of energy or an opposition of energy, polarities that are playing with each other, and might cause a very nuanced personality, and or just like something that you might feel always happens to you, or like something like that. And I look to that because those things are way more specific than just being like, oh, you're a Libra, you're a Sagittarius, you're fiery and you have passion. Like, it's just more than that. It's like, okay, your Saturn is not configured to Pluto in the most beneficial aspect. You might have issues with obstacles coming from transformations that you're trying to make. Say you're trying to like build something through transforming your diet. You might like have to go through more challenges maybe than it seems to other people, just because of that aspect. So I would say that's the first thing I look at, and then of course it gets deeper and deeper, and I don't want to become unapproachable, but I guess what would you say?
The first thing I look at is the sun, moon, rising, so the big 3. And I usually, when I do like a reading for somebody, if they're interested in astrology, I will ask them like, what is your deepest driving desire? I just ask them straight out the gate, and I get that information, and then I ask them like, how would you explain your feelings come to you, or how would you say you feel things? Is it like really intensely? Is it like, okay, I can feel things, but it feels like I can manage it? Or is it really like fiery? Is it really like I feel really a lot of emotion when I feel energies and I feel emotions? And then I get that information. So the first question is the sun. the second question about feelings is the moon. And then I ask them, what's your view on life? Like, through what lens do you look at the world? And I get their information, and that is the rising sign.
Mm-hmm.
So I see what their experience is of the world without knowing anything about their chart. And then I say, okay, well, in your birth chart, you're actually, for example, a Libra sun, and your deepest driving desire might be like harmony, and it might be like balance in your own body, in your own life. And if you're a Sagittarius sun, your deepest driving desire or like value may be like travel and expansion and like experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just like a generalization. But I get that information from them because I want to keep it that their experience is valid and that astrology supports it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I like
Yeah.
make the connections of like what's happening in their real life on the ground, astrology aside,
Mm-hmm.
and then I say, oh, your sun, moon, rising is this, and that makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
right?
So, yeah, for someone who has gone through a lot of trauma or like
Mm-hmm.
rough experiences, what do you say to someone who feels like they feel like they can't get over that hump, or they always have that guilt, or like
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
it's always, I don't know, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
everything bad always happens to them.
Yeah. Yes. There's so many things I would
I'm
say.
sure there's a
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
define yourself first. Is that what you kind of
I
started
would
with?
say yes, because astrology is like this. It's like an understanding, and to know astrology is also to like understand energy, and to like be sensitive to energy. And I'm sure like you both are like understanding that in a way. And trauma is like so nuanced, but it's literally energy that's stuck in the body. So I also can see it as when you understand energies, the 12 energies in the zodiac, you can understand what kind of energy is stuck in your body from trauma that hasn't been completed or something that hasn't been said. That's what the nature of trauma as somebody who works with trauma. There's so many links with astrology, but I would say separate them for now. And the person who's asking about how to get over that hump is to be with what is in the moment. Meaning what needs to like be completed here, like what needs to be resolved or like alleviated, and do that thing for yourself, and like create your life in a way where you can like have supports that like alleviate that for you. That makes sense?
Yeah.
That in itself, and I can connect that to astrology, like that is very like Mars. It's like
Okay.
Mars energy is like that can be too fast too soon, which is trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Something happens too fast too soon, the body can't keep up.
Mm-hmm.
The body is the moon. Mars and the moon can speak to trauma in your birth chart, but that's something we can get into later.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
that was a good question. Yeah.
And
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
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 I also feel like another way that you could just, even if you were interested more in the, like in your own birth chart, but you do have these things in life that tend to happen, and you just want to know if astrology has like any relation, like the connection you're saying. Obviously the way to work through it is exactly what you said, like going through it versus like avoiding
Through
it and through
versing.
astrology.
The way out is
But-
through.
But
Yeah.
like I would say the 12th house and Pisces connect a lot to like the subconscious and the things that are a little bit hidden from us.
Which is our body.
So, and when I say like hidden, it's like it could just be like you might just have, I don't know, like I notice that people who have sun in the 12th house tend to have like fixations and or like associations with spirituality and or like not the opposite of spirituality, but like trauma,
The darkness.
the
yeah.
darkness, the other side of spirituality.
They're like living there, like they've had experiences in life that like, oof, like
yes,
I feel that
oof,
deeply.
like any placement in the 12th house
Yeah.
can bring that kind of, I guess.
And there's also
Okay.
like patterns that can be stuck in the body that this can get a little bit like controversial, this statement, but there's like certain patterns that we relive that allow ourselves to like attract certain situations into our lives because we're emanating a frequency.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're emanating a certain frequency, that the universe responds by sending us back the match of that frequency.
Mhm.
So you may be experiencing these patterns in your life that are undesirable. And you're like, how do I want to stop attracting or making that happen in my life?
Mhm.
Because that's all the body is seeing. Because scientifically the body is like scanning for safety and it's scanning for threat. So it's constantly looking like, what's going to happen?
Built to
So that's a
survive.
frequency, that's also the science. There's also like astrology that can be explained with that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And astrology can help us like move gently out of that frequency in a way that feels really authentic to us, because I'm not saying to like bypass the shit and just be high vibrational, because that's not the way.
Yeah.
The way out is through it and feeling it. And you can then from there establish like a higher love based frequency in your own body and energy. And your life will respond to you accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What do you think, when astrology first came up, do you think that, how does it relate to stillness and stoicism, or, you know, faith and religion, those kinds of things, like where they gave people hope, and or stillness, meditation, however you want to say it? Do you think that, how does astrology play into that? Like, do you think when you get someone's charts and you can look and see, like, kind of where the alignments are at certain times in their lives, that might help them be still through difficult times or good times, because you kind of know, you trust that energy that is going to align? Those are my words, but
Yeah.
kind of like stillness and astrology, how do those play in?
Yeah, I would like the first thing that came to my mind would be like the archetypal thing that comes with astrology. I would say like, yes, there are transits. What you're speaking about is called transits, like when planets kind of light up a certain area of your life. Say you have a stellium in the second house like you do, and like Jupiter goes over them. And maybe things feel like overwhelming, like you can't even like handle, like it's just really busy. That is something that can just be more of like, okay, I know that this is happening, so this is supposed to feel this way, but the way that I will deal with this is by kind of like diving into the archetype of the sign that it's in, or like what planets are at play, and taking the archetypes from those. So for instance, that happens in Scorpio in your chart. I'm just doing that because I just saw it. So Scorpio, right? Like, say for that, like you would look to Pluto, and where Pluto is, focusing in on the energy that will be the most supportive for you in that moment. Like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but I can't. But basically just knowing, like having the knowledge that there are difficult transits that are aspecting in any way. It doesn't have to even be like a conjunction. It could be like a square. That's a way to just have the awareness that something is going to feel overwhelming, and you know that because of Jupiter. So that's just all comes with knowledge of this whole, what all the planets mean. And then you can, based on whatever planet it is, you find stillness in whatever that works for you. So the moon, like doing things with your body. If the moon is having transits to those areas, you do things in the body that feel good. If Jupiter is there, I would I would sit back and try and just meditate, because Jupiter can be like expansion, like overwhelming and crazy, but you would kind of just apply it what the planet represents in those times.
Yeah, I would say like with stoicism and stillness and how astrology relates to it, like I think there's a capacity to like be in stillness that we all have, and knowing the transits, knowing like that astrology is happening and that you're separate from it, that in itself is a practice of detachment and stillness, and like seeing that there's energy happening in the world, and that may create events, and that it's not you, or feelings, and that those feelings like are not you. And that in itself creates a detachment from the happening, the event.
Right.
That you can be in your own stillness and your own stoic practices of like, I'm not super versed in stoicism, but I feel like it's like stillness, a detachment, and like those kind of
having
principles.
just the wisdom.
And like standing in your like...
Wisdom is a virtue.
Yeah, and like standing in your like okayness. So like just the whole knowledge of like, okay, the planets and like the energies on this planet like move around a lot, and like the things that are happening in my life, like I can be detached to them in some sense.
Yeah.
And I'm not the owner of them.
Yeah, and like I'll just say this one thing, like Jupiter conjoined Saturn in December of 2020, and
which is a big deal.
It's a big deal. And people say like Jesus Christ was born under that kind of transit, like just crazy, just kind of like like universal like alignment and like craziness happening. So during that time, I was like very much didn't want to. I knew that, and I was like, I think I'm going to be less social than normal, because I just know that something
You
might.
felt something like rumbling underneath.
Yeah,
and
something
you needed to
like-
like be still.
Right. So just having the knowledge of it could just help in
Yeah,
situations
I
like
think-
that.
It's interesting because Stoicism, in a nutshell, kind of how I like to describe it, which my description is not the best, but at a high level, it's kind of control what you control. So like anything
Yeah.
that you don't control. And to me, from what you just said, it kind of sounds like astrology is that a little bit. Like you're almost kind of letting the universe, or let these signs, again, my terminology, but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you're like letting this kind of dictate. You don't control that necessarily.
Exactly.
Like, so it's an interesting kind of relation.
So that's really interesting, because it's like, I think something that's really helpful is in life is like, what can I control in this situation? My response. I can control my response.
Yes, every time.
And sometimes you can't,
Always.
because you're like hyper vigilant and you're like fuck, and you get angry, right?
But technically,
But there's
you
there's no space between stimulus and response. But like when there's space between the stimulus and the response, you can choose your response.
Mm-hmm.
And in astrology, there's things that are happening that you can't control in the world, right? So you can't control.
We can't control that we're going
You can't
through
control
a Pluto
that you're
return
going to a
right
Right.
that America is going through a Pluto return right now, which is basically the fall of an empire. We can't control that the planets are moving in a certain way.
Yeah.
Like you're going through your Saturn return right now, right?
We just
But
have
we
to go
can
through
control our response and awareness around them,
it. Mm-hmm.
and that's key.
And just having the knowledge that the next 2.5 years might be a little bit more like challenging.
Might be challenging
Could just
for
be
you.
helpful.
Right.
And having the knowledge that you might experience some like heightened limitations in the next 2 years for you.
And maybe touch on that. Like that was fascinating to me.
You're like,
before.
tell me more.
Yeah, like explain, because like, and for the audience, like they just got my sign, you know, like what,
Birth
3
chart.
or
we
4
just-
hours ago.
yeah,
like,
yeah.
We just looked at it. I'd never seen it, but where I'm at in my life right now, that sign, whatever you guys were telling me, kind of very accurately described exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah,
So what we saw. So we. Do you mind?
Yeah, no,
so
go
what
ahead.
we pulled up Nick's chart, and then right away we saw that he was going through his Saturn return.
But
Which, like,
today,
Literally today
today
is the
is
exact
the day.
day that
That it's
Saturn
exact.
meets 6 degrees
Oh,
of Pisces.
Pisces, yeah.
So this is his exact Saturn return. Like that's wild.
It's pretty
Saturn
wild.
return.
Yeah, so we got it
Yep,
on
yep.
camera, so.
So yeah. So I was like, hey, are you experiencing some limitations in your work, in your finance career?
And we
were
said
talking about that
before.
earlier.
He even said that.
Yeah.
Not like
Yesterday.
you were saying that, but yeah.
But
you
that
said
is
it
like
yesterday.
in your
Yesterday.
awareness. Like
Yeah.
there's like a struggle happening there.
Yeah,
So it's reflected.
it's
right?
reflected.
It's
yeah.
reflected. And having an awareness of like this was gonna happen anyways, and it's not your fault necessarily. And it's just like this is the
It's-
cycle of life. Like I just ended my Saturn return. It was like the past 2 years of my life, and it was fucking tough.
Yeah.
And I knew it every moment of it. I knew I was going through it, and that allowed me to be like, okay, and I could set it down for a second, and I could like give myself rest, which actually made me accelerate through it in a better, more like
Mm-hmm. More
successful
aware way. Yeah.
like I was like, oh, I'm gonna like hunker down and like get this shit done. Whereas before, when I didn't like have the awareness around it
Mhm.
or any like acceptance or like openness, I would beat myself up because I'm like, I'm having such a hard time. I'm a piece of shit. What's going on?
Yeah.
Right.
Right?
And to bring that like full circle, like it almost is again like on the stillness side. It's kind of like that's how it was relieving to see that for me, because it's like, okay, I look at it as from a growth mindset where it's like, okay, you know, you need to get knocked down to get back up. You got to go through hard times to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But it's also coming from this lens of astrology where it's like you see the same thing that I'm seeing. So there's stillness in knowing that,
Yes.
that you're kind of
The
on this path that you're
gods
supposed
are
to
putting
be,
you
which
through
isn't
this
perfect.
either way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Either way, you're gonna go through it,
Fascinating. That's
whether
cool.
you're aware of it or not.
Yeah. So you gotta
Yeah.
watch out for yours coming up.
I know.
The next however many years.
So is that a better time for him to like grind harder or slow
It
down? Is
depends.
that like
I guess it would depend on where it is.
Whether it's-
So I would say like grind harder in a way of like be more aware, like have the mental grit, but also
Okay.
give yourself space.
But also
like,
look
like
into
nourish
the
your
details
mind.
of the place if you're into it and you want to understand more of how this will show up. It would be fascinating to look into. Okay, yours is in Pisces, same with me, but I'm way at 24 degrees. So your Saturn return is happening in Pisces. What does Pisces represent? You look at that.
And you might
Neptune-
find connections, like Pisces
Yeah.
is a water sign,
And-
so your emotions might play into this a lot.
Exactly, and you're
Okay.
Like there's more.
and it's happening in the 6th house, which is all about your daily work,
Daily
your
work,
labor,
routines,
routines,
getting up in the morning and like
health.
doing things, and your health.
Yeah.
Your health is another theme of the 6th house.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
So,
a lot of this thing you're saying is stuff that I'm currently diving into or looking at.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
interesting.
It's, and I think like it's just beneficial because you really don't know much about astrology. The fact that we could find something for you to like take to into your life is the cool thing,
Yeah.
right? And even if you don't want to learn about astrology, you can take the benefit from like asking us.
Yeah.
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Or listening to our podcast every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Alright, I have one. So, this could be way off, but if you're starting a business or writing goals down or want to hit the gym, is there a better time of the year for you to start that?
It depends on your chart. I would
Depending
say
on your-
that's interesting. Yes, I would say in Gemini season, that would be a good time to start like a routine.
For everyone,
out?
or depending
No.
on?
Not for everyone.
Right.
So,
But also Virgo.
yes. So I guess I said Gemini because my 6th house is in Gemini. So scratch that. I would
Look
say
to your 6th house.
look to your 6th house. So if I had your chart in front, which we should have, but I would look at your 6th house and see what sign rules that house, and whatever sign is that season, I would say that's the season
And,
for you.
Okay.
And
So I'd have to look at it.
Yeah.
from a seasonal kind of like wellness standpoint, I study seasonality and like I don't know. I love looking
Like the
at
rhythms of
seasons and the
nature.
cycles
Mhm.
of things, and the equinox times of the year, so spring and fall, are also times that there is obviously an even amount of light in the day, and that to me always represents a time where you can like literally shift something totally completely upside
Yeah.
down, and it will kind of like ease its way into the next
Yeah.
tropical cardinal season.
Even
So-
amount of day and light.
Yeah,
So, fall and
the fall
summer
and spring, and
equinox.
also like the way you know how in the cycle of a year, the way that you feel during the times of year, like in the fall, you're just like, I know school usually happens. That's very Virgo season of us as a society.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah.
that naturally
Very Virgo.
actually is like a very good time to get productive because we are hunkering down to like be in the winter of our lives, or in the
northern hemisphere.
In the northern hemisphere, but also the springtime, we're about to like awaken to the world. We're like coming back up again, so it's also a great time to shift things around. But I would also, in astrology and from an astrology lens, look to your 6th house.
Yep.
So where you live plays a whole nother factor.
Where you
in
live.
this.
Yep. Exactly. And like looking at your birth chart, where you were born on this planet makes a difference
Mhm.
because it depends where the angles are of the sky to where you were born on the
But
planet.
also, what's even cooler is in your chart, you can even like outline the seasons. And if you have like a lot of planets in a fall season, like
Mhm.
like the end of or Sagittarius,
So fall season is Sagittarius, Scorpio, and Libra.
Libra. So if you have a lot of planets in the fall, but you don't have a lot in the spring, you might feel really active in the fall, like too overwhelmed, or the opposite. And
Yeah.
then spring is better to make the change.
Yeah.
Like it's just more easeful, or like
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
similar ways that you can look at that. But
Mm-hmm.
What can astrology teach us about death?
That's a good question.
that's a pretty
That's
deep
re-
question.
Is there
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
anything on that you've seen or that you've read or that you've learned through this whole process that
Well,
can teach us anything about it?
yeah, like I feel like I've made my own I've come to my own like realization of like, because in the birth chart I was always intrigued by the 8th house, which represents death and rebirth and transformation. So I always associated death with like transformation and rebirth, which that is what it is in the world. Like there's something dies and then the soil grows and then something else like grows out of the soil. So I always saw it as like a regenerative sort of thing. And I think with astrology, like, so what really inspires me about astrology is you can read into past lives. So that in itself, when you believe in past lives, for example, like your soul is eternal and it lives forever, and your soul has lived many past lives as other humans on this planet way back in like 2,000 years ago BC. Like you may have been like a Greek god at some, like a Greek you know, like I used to be like, I feel like in a past life I used to live in Europe and I was like I was like a weaver or something, and my soul just knows that experience. And in this life, like my soul is living as Kate Manuel, as making this podcast, and I have a sister named Liz Manuel, and I have cousins, like, and that may be a new idea for you, but past lives have always intrigued me, and astrology can read into your past lives, like where your soul has come from, what your soul knows on such a deep level, and where your soul is headed in this life, like what's your big lesson in this life. Like that's what I've learned. Like in a past life, I think I have like the south node in a certain place, which represents past lives, and in this life I'm moving towards like stillness and philosophy and teaching and like education and solitude. Like that's very much the theme of my life. I can like see it and I can literally feel it, like it's undeniable, and I know that that's astrology. Like I can see it in my chart and I can feel it in my own body. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
I would say another place to look, and this is just another like thing that I study with the seasonality of things, but where the 12th house meets the first house is considered your ascendant, and it's your rising sign, how she said, basically the lens you see the world. But it is the place where Pisces, which I'm sure you've heard of, and Aries meet, and it is considered, it is actually the time of year where winter turns into spring.
It's like
it's
the death.
March. It's early March into like late March. That is like it's where, to me, where like the magic happens, and it actually, that area represents like our birth, because we're in Pisces. We are like
the very
soul.
last sign.
It's the very
the
last
zodiac.
sign of the zodiac, and it's considered like the last of the year. So Aries is considered the new year in astrology, March, late March, or mid March, and to just focus in on that area, because that to me is where like death, birth is all happening.
Yeah.
So like I'm a Scorpio rising, so like, and I have an 8th house stellium. I have a lot of planets in the 8th house, which you just said, which also rules by Scorpio. I have Pluto in the 1st house, which is ruled by Scorpio.
Yeah.
I just have a lot of like the transformational elements in me as like a person.
Yeah.
And I tend to just look to that area, and where if you have planets in that area, that's a good indicator of like how you might be around transformational times in your life. Like, I don't want to say like birth, because you don't know how you are at birth, and you don't know how you really are going to be at death. But like that, I just find that area could be an indicator into how things might, or how you might approach death and rebirth.
Yeah, and like where you're going.
Where you're
in
going.
the next life.
Yeah.
Like, also, you can pull a death chart, which is something I've done before. But you can pull like the chart of the exact time that someone has passed, and you can gain insight into what their life beyond this realm is looking like, which is interesting.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what lessons
people
they're
have
learning.
mixed emotions about that, because
Yeah.
a lot of people think that like, oh, it's no longer valid because we're not
Because
on
they're
Earth
not on
anymore.
Earth.
But
Yeah.
I think it's valid, but I also like, I just have a weird thing about pulling those types of things.
This-
So I'm like,
Yeah.
This might be a crazy question, but do you think psychics use astrology?
Oh,
Absolutely.
For
Do
real?
I know that?
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Oh wow.
I know a lot
Yeah.
of astrologers who are also psychics who like gain insights into like, okay, this might happen at this point because
Yeah.
the planets.
And typically they come off unrelated. Like Jessica Linietto is somebody that
Yes.
Kate and I really
Yes.
love. She's a medium. She also is very, very good at astrology, but she very rarely associates the two together in her readings. But I think she uses insights from both. And she says, oh, that's probably why
yeah.
in astrology,
Yeah.
talking about each other.
I think people who tend towards astrology are also very intuitively aligned,
Yeah.
like psychic wise.
Yeah. And
You can
fun
gain
fact,
insight into that too.
I heard that during the time of the Titanic, there was like a writer or something who was kind of up in his caliber of like in his class, and he went to an astrologer to see if he should go on the trip, and she told him not to at all. She was like, "Do not go on that."
Really?
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
Just feeling something.
Yeah.
Just-
Yeah, she was probably looking at the
Or
chart.
like-
But then
okay.
in astrology, there was of
And
course a
intuitively.
T-square, which was like
Yeah.
just
Interesting.
a bit, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So psychics claim not to use astrology? or
No.
They-
I mean, some might, but
I think, yeah,
I think like it's pretty. People who are psychic,
they back it up with.
yeah,
I
they
would
can
say
use
it's-
it as their in their
yeah.
toolbox.
I was gonna say a
Okay.
tool in the
Like a
toolbox.
tool in the
That's kinda what I
toolbox.
was thinking.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because they're already, it seems like the whole thing is like super frequency, energy, vibrational based, which sounds woo woo wah wah to some people, but like,
Yeah.
I know like even when you go out and ground and stand on the ground, anyone who's stood on a beach, like you put
You
your feet in
feel
the
a
sand,
different
you
way.
feel it, and like that's kind of like to me,
Proof.
yeah, like in a way, like
Yeah.
that's how I'm thinking of this. It's kind of like it's a
And-
a
yeah.
connection to something bigger than yourself, which
Yeah.
is philosophy, religion, and all these things that they teach.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the
Um,
saying, like, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It just goes to show you, like, a person obviously holds energy. So
Yeah.
if my energy cannot be created and it cannot be destroyed, that means that my energy is just in this vessel, but it's been here before. Or it's been somewhere else. And it's gonna continue to be somewhere. Hence why there's just this whole thing that we know as humans that, like, there is another thing beyond this life. There is something else. Multiple people have, like, had ghost stories, have had, like, and it's not really, it doesn't really have to be all about ghosts, but it's just like there is an energy that, like, still is here.
Yeah.
Or still is elsewhere, but it's just, it can't be destroyed.
There's, it's also just interesting, like frequency, energy, and how it relates to astrology, which is like, I know you had that question.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because there's, I don't know how to say this, but Isaac Newton, it was like the astronomer. He was an astronomer. So he studied like the planets and like how they moved and gravity and mathematics. And hence he created like Newtonian physics. So he was like the founder of physics and how like if I drop this glass, it would drop at a certain rate. If an apple falls from a tree, it would drop at a certain rate of gravity and the math that's associated with the planet and the pull of the sun, whatever. That's Newtonian physics. And that is kind of like, okay, we understand the world as like 3D, and that's all. That's it. Everything you can see exists, nothing else exists, right? That was his like philosophy. And now scientists are saying in quantum mechanics and quantum physics, this is like literally proven now, that and everything is made up of like a moving energy. And we are all frequencies, and down at the deepest subatomic level, we are made up of nothing. Like it's literally nothingness. We are made up of mostly nothingness. And there's particles that like pop up now and then, and that's how things manifest, is like this popping up of a particle. And that very much relates to astrology, because like we are connected to the planets. If there's like a web of energy beneath this whole 3D realm, then I'm connected to you because we are all made up of the same stuff. So like there's this like underlying web. That's how I explain it. And we are connected also to the planets that are like millions of light years away. And they have a pull on our energy. Like if you think of us as like webs.
But
That's
also-
really trippy, but like that's how I think of it.
Yeah,
And the
I can grasp
idea that, like, we are in a solar system that only holds 7 planets? 7 planets? And it's like we are just we've been circling around each other for like years and years and years and years and years.
Thousands.
So like how could we not be affected by something that affects us so much,
That
like
affects
the sun
the earth
and
and
the
the
moon.
tides.
The sun and the moon affect us greatly. When the sun is not out, we're like, oh, it's a rainy day, let me like go read instead.
Yeah.
That is literally us making a decision. Like you said, it's gonna do another
Yeah.
series of events because we did that.
Yeah.
So it's like the way we feel and the way that things happen in life are absolutely influenced at least by the planets that
At
are
least.
always
At
around
least.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest, like, let me ask 2-part questions. Like, first one though being, when did you two get into astrology
Good question.
and how?
Yeah.
So our mom was like really into astrology. Or she wasn't really into it, but she had like
She
books
just- yeah.
on the table. And this is all the story I tell it all the time. Is like the coffee table had like an astrology book. And I would like look at it and I was like, oh, this is my birthday, so I'm a Scorpio. Cool. And then I would like read what Scorpio was all about, and I was like, I've always been interested in myself and just like getting to know myself better. I'm like, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
And reading that would just like make me feel like a little bit more clear. And then I just constantly would be interested in it. So I would just observe it with my own knowledge and just self-study it up until now.
And it was really just
And
an
to
influence
continue
on
to
me
self-study.
of that. Like, I think
Yeah.
you were like, Liz, look at this, like, you're a Cancer. Read about it. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And then she got, like, even more books. And then we got a CD where we got, like, literally a CD computer thing that came with a book.
Yeah.
And she would put it in, and she'd be like, okay, let's put in our birth information and look at our birth charts. Like, I was doing that at, like, at least 12, maybe, like, 13? I don't know. Like,
just
it was around
curious,
that time.
just like curious about like
and she would, like, show
what
us
the
how to
wisdom
do that.
is. Yeah.
Like, with the book and the CD. She didn't
Yeah.
know everything about it, but she
Yeah.
was just like, look. And we're like, wow.
It's just always sparked an interest.
What did
Yeah.
your friends think about, or did they know, like, when you first started learning this, what did your friends think about it? Did
I
they
think
have
they all-
opinions on it, or
I
were
think
they
they all
like,
thought it was pretty cool.
We would have people come over and we would like read their
Read
I'd be
their
like, what's
thing.
your birthday? And
Yeah.
like you're a Libra, you're an Aries, and they would always be like interested to like hear what we had to say or
Yeah.
what the book said.
Yeah. Everyone was always open to it. There was nobody who was just like, I don't care. Like, it
And
was always
yeah.
an open
Yeah,
thing.
it was pretty.
what do you
open.
think you learned from when you first picked up those first books and thought you knew, like your first
Oh, yeah.
perception of it?
Oh.
Like,
I mean, I thought
what do you
my
think
sun
you've learned
sign.
till now?
Yeah.
Like, how's that changed?
Oh yeah.
I thought my
As you-
sun sign was everything. I thought I'm a, well, here's the issue with it all is like, you think you're just your sun sign, especially at that age, and you're just like, oh, I'm a Cancer, but like, I don't really feel like motherly right now. I don't feel
Yeah.
like I'm nurturing everybody and like being just this like Cancerian mother. Like,
Yeah.
but that just goes to show because it's like there's so many more placements that are happening, and I come to find out I have a bunch of planets in Gemini, and I'm like, oh, that's why I'm like constantly thinking and like constantly writing down and like having interests, and like that's not a Cancerian trait. So what I've learned is basically you are not like your sun sign, and that's really just scratching the surface of how you are,
Yeah.
who you are.
I've learned a lot. Just I'm so different than what I thought I was. Yeah, I think I defined myself. I put myself in a box. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm this way.
Right.
And then I would like make an excuse
Oh
for
my
being
God,
shitty.
is that why you put on heavy eyeliner? Because you were like, I'm a Scorpio, I need to be really
No, I
intense.
think I just felt that way. I think I was just a teenager and I was just like, I don't care about life. I'm
She's
just gonna
figuring
put
it out.
heavy
She's
eyeliner
figuring
on.
it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I put myself in a box, I think, and then I continued to learn and I was like, oh, there's so much more to learn.
Yeah.
How do you, have you guys come across a lot of males that are into astrology? I'm drawing on my experience, and I feel like I've seen more females in it. So, like, how do you change that message to,
I would, yeah.
to
Yeah.
To be more,
maybe
to be more
have
inclusive?
have us open our minds more to it? Because I feel like it's a
Yeah.
stigma.
Well, what would you want to hear?
Yeah,
Like, what,
I
like,
guess- That's what I
This, I
wanna
mean,
know.
this is interesting. Like, this, giving me my sign and stuff
Yeah.
like that, and then seeing how that related to.
What was the thing that made you think it wasn't stupid from even like, it made, like
yeah, or
along
that it
the
was
line
valid.
of where you guys
Grounding
ended?
for me,
Grounding?
grounding through fitness was the first stage. I
Yeah,
think you
exactly.
kind of like stoicism and grounding,
Yeah.
and then energy and like frequency, and then you guys were talking about that like the last couple of days, and it's like
Yeah.
That's a good one.
like,
I would
ties
say.
so close together that
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like there has to be something
yeah,
there.
there's something there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what's pulling me to
to
learn
like just
more
want to
about
know
it.
more.
Yeah.
It's really just like astrology is acceptance for who you are. And it's just like this longing to know more about yourself and your soul and like find a little bit of like light. Like that's the draw. For most
And-
people, I think for
and-
men,
okay.
like for men it's like everybody's different. But like I don't know, for the men in my life, I know that they get benefit from knowing what their sign, what their big three are, and just being like, just pondering it. for
Yeah,
a second.
I feel like men usually just
They're
are
just
like,
like,
well, tell me about this, and then I'll, yeah.
and then they
I mean,
like
that's
leave
kind
it, and then they're like, okay,
yeah,
thank you.
exactly. But I think also what maybe would draw more men to it is understanding that certain events that happen in real time in life, in like life, and understanding a transit that's happening and how it relates to that event happening. Very little. Like it doesn't have to be big. Like okay, just an example. Last week, I was in 2 public areas at separate times, separate days. And in both places, I had an older female women fall in both instances
Huh.
over the course of 1 week. And I was like, okay, that's not that I like related it back to astrology, but things like that, like things that it doesn't have to be something that keeps happening. It could just be something that like really stood out to you and you were like, what was that? You know?
Yeah.
But things like that, similar to that, like I would say, okay, look at the transits if you were to understand what that all means. And I would be able, or Kate and I would be able to be like, okay, well that could have been like Mars leaving Cancer. Like, I don't know, like the old women, it's at the 29th degree.
And I
so-
find, find that there's always like a message that the universe wants to send to you constantly. Literally constantly the universe is talking to you. And astrology is also a way to like listen to what the universe wants to tell you and send to you and tell you to like grow, like how to become your best. What do you need to work through right now? There's always a message being sent to you.
There's always a
in
message.
like a certain way.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
And that's how I'm thinking of it, like where I'm at right now, like learning about all this. It feels like I've always, not always, but in the last 5-6 years been like super into health and super into these different pillars that I like, you know, see all these podcasts, see all these people talking about it, and then you kind of take your own spin on it and make your own kind of pillars out of it, like whether it's grounding or activity or water or this and that. This seems like a tool that I would add to that. Like it just seems like another pillar of health to me on the holistic side, however you want to say it. I'm just going to call it health. But it seems like another tool in there, like whether it's a little different than religion and philosophy is how I'm understanding it, but there's truth in all of these things, whether I disagree or don't agree totally with it, that there's something in there. This is fascinating to me because I think what opened my mind originally to it was, and I just never really dove into it until now, is figuring out like when you just think about the planet, right, regardless of religion, philosophy, astrology, anything, the fact that, you know, those birds out there can go eat those bugs off the tree and survive, or there's water over there for them to drink, or these animals eat these animals in the food chain, and you get into all this stuff that when you really zoom out, it's like everything's here for a purpose.
Yes.
That is what draws me into this, is like that I see like how big the universe is, and we're to think that one religion or one this or one that, you know, might be the end all be all. There's truth in all of it.
There's truth in all
and that's
of it.
where like this is kind of making me kind of like zoom out and look at it as like just this whole universe that exists is insane. And to think that there's not all these like putting these trees here, putting that there, like it's just fascinating to me. And that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's like you zoom out and you start to look at it from that perspective, and that's where I can start to buy in a little bit. Is hearing you talk through it.
So like thanks for sharing that. Like the connection of all the movements of the universe and like how things are connected is like making you feel a little bit like, oh, okay, so there's like religion, there's philosophy, but then there's like astrology, and it's like kind of all explaining the same principle.
Yeah.
Like that in itself is grounding.
And like
Well,
even
that's grounding, however you say it.
Also, I guess another really specific way to also think of astrology, like when you think about the gods, the Greek gods, and how the Greek would define Hermes as like whatever they would define it as, but it was a personality thing, you know? They had an archetype. Hermes wouldn't do the same thing Venus would do, or Aphrodite, or whatever it is, because they all had these like specific personalities. But when you think about like mythology and the way that like gods and goddesses were defined, astrologers actually tended to like also kind of define them in ways of, like, I've heard that one of the planets, Mercury, is very much interrelated with, I think it's Hermes. Don't quote me on this. But like the planets are associated with gods, and Venus, Aphrodite.
Because it's giving you an example of the energy.
It's giving you an example of an energy, yeah, exactly. And Zeus.
Zeus is like Neptune.
Neptune,
right?
Yes, Zeus is
Don't
Neptune.
quote us, but like
I do think that you're right.
Yeah, so it's like well, no matter what your belief system is, there's energies, and this planet is that energy.
Yes. And what I was gonna say is religion is overarching, beliefs are overarching, but when people got into things like that, it's very much like the same nuance that we're dealing with astrology is like what I would relate to like Greek mythology as. How people wanted to just define what anger was. They were like, okay, what's anger? It's Zeus. It's
Mars.
He's making the waves over, because waves, it's water, it's emotion, it's intuition. So it's like all of it just relates.
Yeah.
All of it relates.
Yeah,
to the human experience.
It's so interesting because you know, they were just trying to figure out the world. Like you come out and you're looking at these stars, like what?
Yeah.
And we still all do that. And
Yeah.
You're looking at it, you're trying to find all these answers, and when you put it all together, there's something to pull from all of it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will be learning about astrology a little bit more.
Yeah.
So
I'm
one more
interested.
question
Yeah.
before we end our podcast. I want to ask you guys, what can we do that would make astrology more approachable?
Yeah.
How would you like to see astrology represented? What would you like to see us talk about that would make it more approachable?
I always have a vision kind of in my head of where I see myself, but I feel like with men, they want to conquer and always want to be striving for something.
Solution oriented.
Yeah, so if you can try and push like astrology in that way, where
In a way of how?
a way of finding their passion, finding what they like to do, their drive, their grind,
Like making it approachable in a way that's like astrology
That's
can help
healthy.
you figure that
That's
out.
healthy
their
and like
sign,
letting
they
that
let
energy.
like kind of like tie it in a way.
Yeah,
I feel like that would help men. Was that your question?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think drawing on experiences too, like your friends or you guys or whoever's been into it, drawing on experiences on how it's helped them and
Yeah.
like things, trends you've seen, kind of what we talked about today, but like drawing some of that experience that you've seen firsthand. You know, granted, it's just a couple people's opinion,
Like
but I think
examples.
that helps me like put context to like what I'm looking for,
Mm-hmm.
and also into like we talked a lot about. I've said it a lot, but like philosophy and religion, all this higher power stuff.
Yeah.
It's like just kind of narrowing in on some of the specifics of like where to start, because I think a lot of people don't know where to start with it. Like that's kind of how I was at. It's
Yeah.
like I know is it the sign like
Yeah,
Libra?
your sun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know that, but you don't go any further. So like
No,
how do you start to like pull back the onion to show a couple more
And that's
layers of
exactly
it?
why it's not
Like,
believable to men, because they're like, it's not approachable. All I know is my sun
And
sign.
it's all women.
I don't
mostly.
really
Yeah.
relate to Libra, so I'll
So I'll leave it.
bullshit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's so much more, and like
Yeah.
you just touched on.
I think
so.
if you walk that through, at least how I'm thinking about it, like will help in our last day or so, it's helped me understand it, like to try to peel back that onion or an apple tree, right? You go up to an apple tree and you start knocking on it and an apple hits you, which is kind of where I'm at. It's like, oh, that exists up there.
That exists.
Yeah.
And then you start to like keep
Yeah.
knocking on it and you start to peel back and just digestible little pieces of like
Yeah.
kind of, because I can hear you guys talking. I know it goes super deep. I'm
Yeah.
interested in it. I'm trying to kind of just understand what's that next layer that I can
Yeah, like
grasp.
how can I approach? Interesting.
And
Yeah.
me and Kate have talked about coming up with a guide, a free guide
A
that we
guide
want to
for
offer
people.
the podcast.
That's like intro.
It's an intro thing. It's just a PDF that kind of explains everything, maybe in like 12 pages, 1 page per sign, planet, all that.
Yeah.
Um,
But that's like a workbook for you to
Workbook.
like that actually helps your life.
helps
It
you
helps
guide
you
you into
like
understanding
translate
what
it
that
into
is.
your own lived experience of like, oh, okay, how can I like move forward and how can I like release some of this energy that I've got and like this conquering energy that you were talking about? How can I like release that in a healthy way? Because
Yes.
also I do think that you can't force people to understand astrology. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Right.
Like you can lead them to it, but like if somebody doesn't have the will to like learn about themselves,
Yeah.
And that's what I said.
and that's
I think that it's like the people that are into like breathwork, meditation, journaling, like all these different practices are the. If they're not into that, they may not ever be into
yeah,
it.
exactly.
The people that are like are us are like trying to learn about it. Like that's a stillness practice to me, like a workbook, like you said, like just trying to figure out like kind of like what is this whole thing, this whole, you know, all this or what you call it, the charts,
Yeah.
like the different charts around yourself, and like to me that's kind of cool. Like I think that's something I'd action on and be able to like start looking at that and start to understand like what those little pieces of that mean.
Yeah.
It's a journaling practice, really.
Yeah.
It is. It's like a self-understanding
Yeah.
practice.
I would say.
Individuation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's a good place to end.
Cool.
So, thank you
thank
so
you
much.
guys for
Yeah,
being
Thanks.
on.
Our
Thanks
first
for having us
podcast.
on.
Thank you.
Yay!
It was a good
Thank
time.
you.